Geelong is Victoria's second largest city outside of Melbourne. It has an extraordinary history and extraordinary past dating from the 1800s. Introduction of wool to Australia, the merino, the Western districts, the Australia rode on the sheep's back, as everyone knows that cliche. This museum begins to tell those stories so that story is not lost. It is part of our heritage. The museum was established over 20 years ago, and the intention of establishing the museum was to tell the story of wool, which is one of Australia's most important stories, as most people would know. The museum has two permanent galleries dedicated to the story of wool. The first is the sheep harvest, which tells all about how wool has grown, but also tells as well the impact that sheep have had on the land. The second gallery, which is called From Fleece to Fabric, actually talks about, literally as the title suggests, how we go from fleece to producing fabric. But we also look too at some of the history of Geelong, some of the mills, the people who worked in the mills and the jobs they did. One of the features of the second gallery is in fact a 1960s operating sock machine, which in fact we still operate to this day and we still actually produce socks on. Apart from telling stories about Geelong, which of course is the wool story and many other stories that we tell about Geelong as well, we also have a multi-function room and an auction room, which we do rent out to clients, and that's an additional source of income, all of which goes back into the museum, and we have an operating theatrette as well. The museum was a concept of many people. Colin Atkins was one of the people behind the concept of the museum, and it developed over many years until eventually it was around about the mid-80s where the museum really started to take shape. And in fact Queen Elizabeth actually came and opened the museum. That was a few months ahead of time though, and then the actual museum opened shortly after that in December of that year. The museum goes across 3 levels. It's quite a significant museum. I think you could probably safely say it's the largest regional museum of its type in Victoria. Our visitation over the past 3 years has actually been very, very pleasing. It's consistently grown, and we're actually on track at the moment to do our 3rd highest level of visitation for the past decade, so that's extremely pleasing. And that will probably take us over about the 40,000 mark. Our visitors range from preschool through to elderly citizens. Our preschool program introduces kids to wool through nursery rhymes, etc. Then we do programs for primary schools, for secondary schools. We even do them for university students. And then of course we've got tourists who visit, the local people who bring in their friends and relatives, etc. So it is quite an extensive audience. We place a lot of emphasis on education. Certainly the touring exhibitions we're bringing in, they have a particular family focus, or certainly about 70% of them do, and there we really do try to bring to the forefront the education, but at the same time we want to keep it educational but also entertaining as well, because otherwise it's not that enjoyable. The museum is at this point in time entirely funded by the City of Greater Geelong. At this point in time, and I say we will change this in the near future, we don't receive funding from state or federal sources. We do charge admission, and all of the admission that we raise goes back into the running of the museum. We have a retail shop which focuses on high quality woolen products, clothing, souvenirs, etc., and also artworks as well. All profit produced from the shop or generated from the shop also goes back into operating the museum, and we also have upstairs spaces that we rent out to corporate clients. Again, all of that revenue goes directly back into running the museum. Yeah, we have a mixture of ways of imparting the information in the museum, certainly in the 2 permanent galleries. Certainly Gallery 1 is almost like walking into a piece of theatre. It's almost coming into a theatre stage as it represents the wool industry. We find that people do read panels, but I think what we're finding more and more these days, and certainly as a younger generation comes through, they're more interested in watching video presentations or screens. But it varies depending on the audience, and it also varies as well depending on the level of interest of the audience and the background of the person. Certainly if we have someone come in from the wool industry, either a wool grower or someone who's worked in mills or whatever, they will spend quite an amount of time reading all of the different panels, looking at all the different shearing appliances, etc. So it varies depending on the visitor. Certainly in the future we will move, I think, towards more audio-visual material and certainly more audio material as well.
That was $10,300 a kilo.
The museum is very, very blessed. We actually have just on 70 different volunteers, each of whom give a minimum of half a day a week to come in and be in the museum and undertake various tasks to help us run the museum, but also to be on hand to show visitors around the museum, to take them on tours and to impart their information. One of the key things about our volunteers is that while they have the general knowledge of the museum, many of them have actually come from the wool industry or a textile background and have lived in Geelong many, many years. So they don't only bring the story that we want them to tell, they also bring their personal reflections as well. And many of them actually bring their crafts in and actually show their crafts to tourists, etc.